Wow, I feel like I'm really humbled by that introduction, Annie. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to come to speak and for all of your support for DanceSafe and the movement in general. Thank you so much. Hi, folks. My name is Madalyn. You can call me Maddie if you want. I don't think I have to say anything further about who I am because of the wonderful introduction I received from Annie. But I am going to present today on this mouthful of a topic right here. Basically, how drug checking has become a vital tool to combat the consequences of the war on drugs. So our discussion today, we'll be covering a range of topics, but just broadly, we're going to be answering these questions, not necessarily in order, but why talk about this topic? Why talk about drug checking? What is harm reduction? What is drug checking? Why is it important? What are the barriers to drug checking? And then what's next for us in this movement? But I want to open it up to all of you folks. Can you tell me why it's important that we're talking about this today? In the back. Did you say? Could we say? Yes, beautiful. I love it. Anyone else want to chime in why this topic is important among all the other incredibly important topics that have been talked about today? Yes?
If we're going to start talking about legal access, and we're talking about access inequalities and people seeking out these different instances, spaces where they're not regulated, then this is going to continue to be important for those individuals and protecting the movement.
Got it. Yeah, I love that. And that's really relevant for where we are here in Oakland and Denver, decriminalizing plant-based medicines. Oh, what Kristen said? Thank you. She was basically saying that with more access of these substances, we have this lack of education, right, around these substances. And so now's the time to be talking about this and to educating, essentially. All right. Anyone else want to chime in? Yeah. Right, so best practices in moving forward while we are gaining more access to these substances. Good, thank you. So these are all really fantastic reasons. But I'm standing up here talking about drug checking, and why drug checking is even an important service is because of prohibition, our lovely friend. We've been through it before in the history of America, and we're here again at the heart of the war on drugs. So rather than controlling and using the selling of substances, what prohibition has done is it's abdicated control to the unregulated criminal markets. And the result is often is frequent misrepresentation and adulteration of substances that folks are seeking out. I can go into the root of prohibition, which I think Ife Tayo really did a great job of talking about. It's racist in its origins, in its implementation, and now it's just running rampant, and it impacts disproportionately, Black and brown communities. And the irony, I guess, is that we've been through this before. So when we don't have a regulated market, people are still going to seek out these substances. And when they're seeking out these substances, they're going to the black market. And the black market is obviously unregulated. And so we saw this during alcohol prohibition. It's not really talked about, and don't have all of the information on it, but I encourage you to do your own research. During alcohol prohibition in the 1920s, there had been a slew of deaths that were associated with tainted alcohol that was being produced on the black market. So we've been here before, and we're still here now. It's gotten worse over the decades. We are in the middle of an overdose crisis, and I'm sure many of you are aware of that now. We've seen since 2016, there were about 64,000 overdose deaths, which was a six-fold increase, largely due to the proliferation of illicitly manufactured fentanyl and fentanyl analogs into the drug supply. So when you make something illegal, like say a precursor for MDMA, if you make that illegal, harder to obtain, there's going to be a flood of new psychoactive substances that come. So in the MDMA scenario, when they made a precursor to MDMA illegal, we saw a flood of synthetic cathinones enter the market, which is what the media colloquially deemed bath salts. So they got a really bad rap. So we're seeing the same situation here with fentanyl. Fentanyl is about 50 times stronger than heroin. Its counterpart, or one of its analogs, carfentanil, is fatal at microscopic doses. And so if you're in the black market, you can get your hands on fentanyl. It can have the same effects as because it is an opioid. And so what we're seeing now is the adulteration of opiates and opioids that are getting purchased on the black market, but also we're finding them in non-opiate substances like cocaine, MDMA, and other various recreational substances. And so it's really become an issue. And at 2017, there were about 70,200 overdose deaths in the United States. So we need to address this, and we need to address this in a really serious way. Drug use has been, well, we deemed it drug use. Our ancestors probably didn't have a word for it other than just experiencing, but it's drug use and altering our consciousness and exploring our consciousness has been a part of the human experience since we know. Some theorize that the discovery of psilocybin and mushrooms in the plain lands of Africa when we started walking erect actually sped up our evolution, because there was a period of about 3 million years where our brains grew exponentially. And in evolution with an advanced creature like Homo sapiens, that's unheard of. And so there is a lot of theory and science to back up that was perhaps when we started and discovered and started ingesting psychedelic mushrooms. So I think Terence McKenna was onto something. What he obviously was clearly the self-administration of psychoactive substances, legal and illegal, will be increasingly a part of the future unfolding of global culture. So I think this is especially true here in America. We're in what we consider the third psychedelic wave. I think that there is a flood of either former psychedelic and drug users from the 60s and 70s who had stopped using and that are starting to be curious again about psychedelic use because it's now being framed as a medicine, as beneficial and therapeutic, which these substances certainly are. And then also a flood of new drug users, young individuals, young adults who are really curious and interested in these substances. And so there's so much more science now on this topic, and it's becoming less stigmatized. We have cities like Oakland, like Denver, that are decriminalizing, plant-based substances, and so there's this need, and so the people that are coming into it and who are curious and experimenting with these substances are again going to the black market. And they don't know what they're going to get. And so drug checking has always been vital, and it's, I think, even more important today, considering the state of our black market. So it sounds like a lot of you are familiar with the concept of harm reduction. I have an asterisk here because I want to talk a little bit about the language harm reduction. Kind of like what Joy was talking about last night. I'll get to that though. Just a basic rundown. The harm reduction is basically a philosophy that accepts the fact that drug use is always going to happen. And so it takes a health approach to drug use, a pragmatic approach. Europe is way ahead of us in this realm of policy. We here in America, we still criminalize drug use. So harm reduction says, well, instead of trying to eliminate drug use, let's approach it and reduce the harms that are inherent in drug use. It also recognizes that drug use occurs on a spectrum, right? And that abstinence, which is what our drug policies are based on, don't do drugs. The DARE program, just say no, highly ineffective. And in fact, there's science and data to back that up. So harm reduction approaches drug use on a spectrum, and it recognizes that abstinence isn't for everyone. And so it meets people where they're at. And that's really, really a vital component of harm reduction and in connecting with individuals who are seeking out harm reduction services. It also gives people who use drugs and people who inject drugs, it returns to them power over their circumstances, and it empowers them to take charge of their health, to find the autonomy, and just to have compassion for these individuals. It also addresses marginalization. So it recognizes that the reality of poverty, class, race, social isolation, past trauma, and sex-based discrimination are all contributing factors to how and why and what substances people decide to consume. And so it just takes a more holistic approach. Harm reduction is a product of the early 90s, specifically in 1990 in Liverpool, I believe, when HIV was starting to become prevalent and when folks were realizing that the dangers of sharing injection supplies. And so the term harm reduction was coined as this philosophy. And I have to give it to all the underground harm reduction organizations that existed before DanceSafe was even a thing, who were serving these more at-risk populations. So this by no means is something that DanceSafe spearheaded, and it had been going on in the underground for a very long time. But DanceSafe, being in a position of privilege, we've been discussing internally, and I know folks like Annie, and we have some Canadian counterparts too that have been discussing changing the harm reduction into risk reduction. Because if you think about what Joy was saying, the inherent in the word harm is that it's harmful to do drugs, right? And if it's harmful to do drugs, they're inherently bad for you. And so if we start to shift the way we talk about and think about this, I think it's going to help continue to break down the stigma around drug use in general. So there has been internal dialogue within DanceSafe and the more privileged community of changing harm reduction and instead saying risk reduction and benefit maximization, right? So it's not about, it's about positive health, and people seek out drug use and actually use drugs to make their lives better or to be able to cope better with whatever it is that they're dealing with. And so with a change in that, I think we'll be able to continue to break down the stigma. It just hasn't happened yet within our organization because for 20 years, we've been operating under the philosophy of harm reduction. It's going to take an entire overhaul of us making the switch. So that's why that asterisk is there, because I think it's important to continue this dialogue. And I know Annie is spearheading this dialogue as well with risk reduction. So we started in the early 90s when harm reduction was starting this underground philosophy. It was actually the Liverpool government was the ones that were like, well, maybe if we can't get people to stop doing drugs, we should reduce the harm. So fast forward to 1998, 1999. Many of you may have heard of Emmanuel Sferos. He is DanceSafe's founder. He is an anarchist punk at heart. And he finally has opened up about his story. And he basically found healing qualities with MDMA and started to discover that while people were seeking out MDMA, they were, getting ecstasy pills, and they just didn't know what was in it. And there were a lot of adverse medical incidences and even death associated with taking ecstasy in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the underground rave scene was really thriving here in the Bay Area. So in 1999, to address this ever-growing issue, he founded DanceSafe. These are photos. Emmanuel is in both of these photos, actually. This is him standing. Hello? Okay. That's him standing in front of the End Up, and that was the first club that DanceSafe ever boothed at. That's a picture of one of the very first ever DanceSafe booths. I'll explain our structure here in a minute about what this is, but these are some of the very first pictures of folks providing free harm reduction services at nightlife events here in the Bay Area. So I was pleased to know that many of you were already familiar with DanceSafe. I'll still go over what DanceSafe represents as an organization. We are basically a peer education organization, so we're a chapter-based organization. We have a board of directors, 3 paid staff members, and multiple chapters across the United States and in Canada. So we train our DanceSafe volunteers. We have an online training course that's free for anyone who's interested. It's a prerequisite. You have to take it and complete it successfully to become a DanceSafe volunteer. But once you do, we connect you with a chapter in your area or encourage you to start your own chapter. And it is really our volunteers that are on the ground doing the services that DanceSafe does. And so they're setting up at music festivals and nightlife events, and they're boothing, and they're there, and they're providing a safe space for people to come talk about the taboo topics, drug use, sexual health, and anything like that. And so our volunteers are educated to have this dialogue, and if they don't, they're trained also to say if they don't know anything, then they're going to find that out, right? And so the peer education piece is really vital because it's effective. The DARE program had law enforcement officers talking to children about drug use, right? And Right, yeah. So we, Emmanuel really had a vision that it's got to be a peer-to-peer thing, right? So that's a really, really important cornerstone of DanceSafe. And what we do is we offer the harm reduction materials in conjunction with services. So we distribute information about heat stroke while providing electrolytes. We, have literature about hearing loss in conjunction. We give out free earplugs at events. We hand out hundreds of thousands of free condoms every year in conjunction with sexual health and consent literature. And then what we're most famously known for is our drug checking services, which we only do at events where we get express permission from the promoters. We don't condone rogue drug checking as DanceSafe because what we're trying to do is build relationships, right? And I'll get to what these barriers of drug checking are here in a minute. And so here you can see these are folks that are visiting a DanceSafe booth. At some events, we have a really distinct logo. We've been around for 20 years, so a lot of goodwill and trust associated with our logo. We have a pop-up, and so I ask you, you all are eyes on the ground, so if you're ever at a DanceSafe event and there's something problematic happening with a DanceSafe volunteer, please let us know, because we have a zero tolerance policy for anything other than what we train our volunteers to present, and that's not taking a non-judgmental approach, being expressing like empathy and stuff like that. So please let us know. We want to keep that goodwill. So then, to address this fentanyl crisis, so DanceSafe is unique in that we are the only 501c3 nonprofit that is basically self-funded. So we sell drug and manufacture reagent drug checking kits, which I'll explain what that is here in a bit. And the sale from our drug checking kits gets funneled back into the organization as a nonprofit, so we can be able to provide support to our chapters, and so we can continue providing these services for free. We have recently teamed up with the University of California, San Francisco, to conduct a study. We basically analyzed 5 urine analysis strips to determine which ones would be the best for the public to use to test their drugs for fentanyl and its analogs. And I'm not sure how many analogs are out there, but there's a lot. And what we found out is that there's only one brand. It's a Canadian manufacturer called BT&X, and it was the only strip that picked up fentanyl and 5 of its main analogs. So we now offer, in conjunction with our drug checking kits, which cannot be used to test for fentanyl, we offer the fentanyl test strips. They're urine analysis strips, so they pick up on already metabolized fentanyl, but they're still just as effective in analyzing your substances. So that is a good segue into what drug checking is. So there's two areas of drug checking. We have presumptive analysis, and then we have confirmatory analysis. What we conduct now currently is presumptive testing with our drug checking reagents. And what reagents are, they're highly corrosive. They're about 98% sulfuric acid mixed with other chemicals. I'm a lawyer, not a scientist. So some of you might actually know way more than me about the reagents. But they react different colors when they come in contact with various substances. So we have this very comprehensive color chart, which I realized I should have probably included in my slides. Hindsight is 2020. But you can see this all on DanceSafe.org. So we just need like a tiny bit of a sample, about a pin tip size of a sample, and we drop a reagent on there and we witness a color change, if any. And what we do is we can match that color change up with our color chart based on years of research, and figure out what the primary composition is of a substance. And this is presumptive testing because we cannot test for purity or potency with the reagents. We're testing for what's most prevalent, right? So we can usually rule something out, but if something tests as suspected, so if we have an MDMA test that tests as suspected, so it has all the color reactions we want to see, even then we can't say, yeah, this is MDMA, because that messaging is wrong, right? We can say this is an MDMA-like substance. It's mostly MDMA, but I can't tell you anything else that's contained in it. And this can be a barrier. It's obviously providing some information to our participants, but not necessarily enough. And so we go into the realm of confirmatory testing, and this requires advanced technology, which requires money, right? And it also requires training, technicians, folks to operate these machines. And so you have confirmatory tests like FTIR, which is infrared spectrometry. You basically shoot a laser into the sample and read all the unique vibrations of the molecules present. And then you can get a breakdown of all the substances in a sample. So you get from most prevalent to least prevalent. Still can't tell potency or purity, but you at least know everything that's in there. You go all the way up to GCMS, gas. I'm not even gonna try it. GCMS, you guys can Google that, but that equipment is hundreds of thousands of dollars. We actually partner with a lab called ecstasydata.org, and you can send, for a fee, you can send a sample into Ecstasy Data anonymously, and they will analyze your substance using GCMS, and then they will post it publicly on ecstasydata.org. So you can start checking back every few days and see your sample. That is the most advanced drug checking that we have. That is not going to be in the picture for us for a very, very, very long time. But we are working towards more advanced technology, which I'll get to here in a bit. So we've addressed this. Obviously, drug checking saves lives, but that's not enough for politicians. It's getting to be enough for public health officials, finally. Insurance companies don't really care either, so people want data, right? We need hard numbers to show how drug checking is working and that it is effective in reducing adverse medical incidences. It prevents deaths. And it's really hard to measure this because what we have to do is we have to really operate in a very clandestine model, right? So we operate under what's called, when we are given express permission to drug check at an event, we're operating under what's called a plausible deniability model. So we don't have anything in writing so that if something did happen, if shit did hit the fan, DanceSafe would take the brunt of the liability instead of the promoters or the venue owners. And we cannot openly advertise our services, so it's all word of mouth advertising. If no one knows what DanceSafe is and they see our booth and our tent at an event, they're not gonna know to come up and ask us to drug check. And so with our 20 years of goodwill, we do have a lot of people aware of what we do. So if you ever see DanceSafe at an event, come up and ask if we're offering drug checking. We very well may be. But we still operate under these barriers. And so we need hard facts to show that this is happening. We teamed up with the university, or Johns Hopkins University, gave them data that we collected, DanceSafe collected in a span of 5 years, I believe, that showed that people do actually change their behaviors when they receive a result from the drug checking that is different from what they expected, right? I didn't include that study, but there is a study that was released in January of this year, and this one was a really good one. It shows positive results on the fentanyl test strips specifically, led some participants, namely young adults, this was a study on drug behaviors of young adults, to alter their drug use behaviors, including discarding their drug supply, using with someone else, and keeping naloxone nearby. And naloxone is a life-saving tool that reduces or reverses opiate overdose. Participants also reported giving fentanyl test strips to friends who they felt were at high risk for fentanyl misrepresentation, and so, or fentanyl exposure rather. So this is why drug checking is important. It works, right? It changes people's behaviors. People are going to alter their intention, their dosage, or even, decide not to consume if they are given information about their substance, right? And it's really, really, really important, especially in this day and age of high adulteration and in the wake of the fentanyl crisis. So I explained under what circumstances we have to operate. Very, very underground, still clandestine, where in countries, one like Europe, in the UK, you have the Loop. In Canada, you have anchors. These folks are operating advanced technology at music festivals in conjunction with law enforcement and the government, and they are posting alerts to the participants of the festival, and it's all very much above ground and mainstream. And so in America, in what we're doing now, we still have to be really hush about it. It's hard to collect the data that we need because we can't openly say where we're testing, right? Because the promoters, to protect the promoters and the venue owners' identity, and to protect them from liability, we can't be open about that. So we're making progress, which I'll get to also. But there are a lot of barriers here in America for drug checking. We have something that's lovely and a lovely piece of federal legislation that's called the RAVE Act. We have state drug paraphernalia laws, criminal and civil tort liability, and of course funding. Just a brief overview of those segments. The RAVE Act was passed in 2003. It was essentially an extension of the 80s crack house laws. It was passed by Joe Biden. Don't vote for him for president. Thank you, yeah. We don't want Joe Biden. And it basically, the gist of it is that if a venue owner or a promoter is knowingly or condoning drug use on their premise, they could face really, really heavy criminal liabilities and up to $25,000 worth of fines. And so, being an attorney, I know the attorneys for the insurance companies, the attorneys for the promoters and the venue owners are saying, oh, hey, look, there's this piece of legislation here. You cannot offer harm reduction services at your event, because the argument goes, if you're offering harm reduction services, you know that there's drug use occurring on your premises, therefore you're condoning drug use, therefore you're guilty under the RAVE Act. It's ridiculous. The risk under that is really low. There's been one conviction, and it was for blatant drug distribution at a small event. But it's still there, and it's still a huge barrier for us. And this is partly the reason why we have to operate under this clandestine, plausible deniability model, right? Pictured here in the background is Dee Dee Goldsmith. She's the one right in the middle. Yeah, does everyone know Dee Dee? Yeah, cool, awesome. She, tragically, her daughter, Shelly, died really young after overheating in a club in DC, and after taking MDMA. And when Dee Dee found out about the RAVE Act and why there were no harm reduction services offered there, including like free water. She took it on herself to try to change that. So for 4 years, Dee Dee petitioned with her senators and was able to finally get 2 letters from the Department of Justice clarifying their stance on the RAVE Act. It was a huge success. From a legal standpoint, the letters don't really give us a lot, but it's something, and it basically says that the RAVE Act was not supposed to like deter clubs and venue owners from offering some type of basic harm reduction services, even if that means free water, right? Because MDMA, a lot of the deaths associated with MDMA is actually from overheating and dehydration. And so, offering free water, even, offering drug literature, like what DanceSafe does. If we're not allowed to drug check, that's fine, but we have a ton of informational literature about, we have these like drug postcards of all the various like common substances that people use that are like really like attractive and like, slightly promotional, but like it really draws people in, and so we can distribute that information so people can educate themselves about about drugs before they decide to take them. And so there's all these other services that we offer that isn't drug checking that I think would be safe now based on what these Department of Justice letters said. So I got to give it up to Dee Dee Goldsmith. She has helped with that. So the RAVE Act, it's still in place though. If you want to sign the petition, go to amendtheraveact.org. One of the big barriers is that, and that which is slowly falling, I'll get to this too, is that under most states' drug paraphernalia laws, testing kits are illegal. It's not usually that big of a liability. It's like usually a civil penalty with a fine associated with it. But it's been a big barrier for specifically public health officials. So if you're in possession of a test kit in one of these states, you could be considered in possession of illegal drug paraphernalia. So that's been a huge barrier. Of course, there's criminal liability in the fact that there's obviously Schedule I substances present when you're providing drug checking services. So if you're a participant and you have the substance, you can be in trouble for possession of a controlled substance. For the drug checker, the person providing the services, there's constructive possession just by means of like close proximity and association with the participant. You have civil tort liability, so if someone came and got their drugs checked, but that messaging or something was off with the messaging and they then ingested that drug, either died or injured themselves or injured someone else, the drug checker, the organization could be held liable for negligence or wrongful death. There's all these things. Those risks are so low. There's no precedent there are no cases out there, not even against any of the clandestine harm reduction organizations that existed in the early 90s that were providing these services. There's nothing out there for any lawyer or prosecutor to like really sink their teeth in. So the risks there are really low, but we're making progress. So based on all these barriers and on the information, what is the future of harm or risk reduction? Have we made any progress? I touched on this, but yeah, we have. The dominoes are starting to fall. We are starting to see state and local reform around state drug paraphernalia laws. DC was the first, and so we're starting to see these states that are doing it on their own initiative, but also like with push from folks like the Drug Policy Alliance, and they're starting to finally remove drug checking kits from the definition of illegal drug paraphernalia, which really is great because it opens it up, especially for public health officials to start possessing and offering drug checking. And then there's the Amend the RAVE Act, which I just explained to you, and the efforts that Dee Dee just went through, which is really exciting. And I should mention that Dee Dee, after 4 years, after she successfully got those 2 letters from the Department of Justice, she stepped down and has officially handed the efforts over to DanceSafe. We have very limited capacity, but we do hope to keep these efforts going. Changing federal legislation is quite onerous, and so if you're interested in helping in any way, come find me and we can chat. So the states that have taken action to remove drug checking from their definition of drug, they're either removing there's a certain language, it's like testing and analysis. They're either removing that language from the definition of drug checking paraphernalia, or they're creating exceptions to it so that folks can possess, without fear of persecution, drug checking kits. Colorado just recently did it. Maryland, Minnesota, Illinois, Rhode Island. So we're starting to see these changes, right? And this is really, really important for access to drug checking services. There's a lot of public health officials and public health agencies within the states that recognize the importance of drug checking, but who are really skeptical to start offering these services, because of the classification of the drug checking kits. And so this is really starting to, if anything, it's making a stance that the states recognize the importance of drug checking as a public health tool. So what's next? We need to continue to change policy. I think it's really, really important for DanceSafe specifically, because we do occupy this space, to just continue to work with individuals, grassroots movements, other drug policy reform organizations and allies to continue to change policy. And that's really going to take a stance in favor of harm or risk reduction, and it's really going to make these services more available to populations, especially those that are non-privileged. As pictured here is our executive director and one of our Colorado state senators, Representative Kennedy. And so we've been actively engaged in these policy reform efforts, and we hope to continue to do that. I'm going to get to the advanced technology last, but the capacity building, that's another huge thing that we're working towards in our very limited capacity as staff. But we're continuing to build and strengthen our numbers. We're putting into place processes that would create longevity for our chapters. Burnout is very real with our volunteers, but we're starting to work on that capacity building. We can reach more communities if we have more people, more hands-on, and so we're continuing efforts in the chapter development and volunteer recruitment, as well as connecting with, or attempting to connect with marginalized communities, so that way we can tailor our services to meet their unique needs. And then finally, advancing our testing technology. The reagents are great. They can be purchased online and used. If you're privileged enough to be able to afford to purchase them online, they're really good and accessible. It's something that you can have at your home, something you can do yourself. But when we are out in the field at these events, we would really love to be able to offer something more, something better, and like other harm reduction organizations in Canada and in Europe. So what we want to do, and what we're currently actively involved and engaged in, is fundraising specifically for advanced testing technology. We're looking into purchasing an advanced, or rather a portable FTIR machine. And I had mentioned before, the FTIR is the infrared spectrometry. And so we would be able to, we want to purchase the equipment. Part of those expenses is keeping library data that's up to date on that machine, and with the constant entry into the market of new psychoactive substances, that's going to cost money to stay up on that, to make sure our libraries are up to date so we can identify all the substances that are out there. But this is just going to be able to give people more information about their substances. So we have currently raised $15,000 of a $50,000 goal. 20? Yeah. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. $15,000 of our $50,000 goal that would go to implement this advanced testing technology program. Oh, and then I have an asterisk here by what's next, because DanceSafe is a white organization. and we service a privileged population. And so I don't think any solution will be whole until we are able to, until Black and brown communities have these services tailored to them as well. And I just want everyone to keep in mind when we're thinking about this, while I'm up here talking about DanceSafe and how great drug checking is, it's really only accessible to the privileged. And so that's what the asterisk is. I think it's really important for us to continue this dialogue and to pull in the voices and the people that we need to help to make this accessible to everyone. If you're interested in this topic, if you think you feel really passionate about it and it's really important to you, you can get involved in many ways. You can volunteer, so you can go to DanceSafe.org and go to how to get involved. And there's a link that'll take you to our free online training course. It's really intuitive. It really is a great program put together by Kristen Kerr, our Director of Operations. You can start a chapter in your area if there isn't one. Again, reach out to Kristen because she's our chapter development expert, and so she can get you started on how to start self-organizing and recruiting in your area to start a DanceSafe chapter. And then you can donate. Donations are tax deductible because we're a 501c3. And if you're particularly interested in donating towards our advanced testing technology program, I'm going to show you my email last. Reach out to me so we can earmark your funds. If you go to dancesafe.org/donate, there's no way for us to know that you want your funds to be used towards the FTIR and its program. So also follow us on social media. We have a lot of engagement. We're close to 60,000 Facebook likes, which is really awesome. We have a presence on Instagram and Twitter as well. We're sharing really, really, really important content, and that's another easy way for you to get involved. So again, dancesafe.org. If you have any more questions, come see me in person or reach out via email. And I appreciate your attention and time. Thank you.